Hello and welcome to the Christopher Hall Training Podcast, where we're going to be talking about how to maintain muscle mass, how to build bone health, and we're going to be doing that by talking about strength training. We're going to talk about it in different sections, so we'll start off by talking about what is strength training, and then we're going to kind of break it down and actually look at the mechanics of it. What are the reps and sets? What sort of weight and load do you need to be using? What are good exercises, injury risk, and sort of how you build into a strength training program. So what we will do now is get stuck straight in. In part number one, we'll talk about what strength training is. So we'll be talking about sort of reps, sets, and loads. So strength training is basically it's heavy lifting. Now, if we are talking about certainly bone health, very specifically bone health, and maintaining bone density and bone mass, we need to be talking about heavy strength training. A lot of exercise advertising, you will see maintains bone health against most forms of exercise. Now, that may be true, but it depends on the state of the bones as you go into it, and I'll sort of explain what that means as we go through, or you'll start to understand what that means as we go through. So, the basic journey of bones: when you're born, they're cartilage. As you grow into adolescence or into childhood, they turn from that cartilage into bone. These bones then obviously get longer and thicker and wider. By the time you get to 25, you've kind of got the let's just say like the biggest, strongest, thickest bones that you'll have, if that makes sense. Now, how thick, long and strong they are will depend on the activity that you've done. When you get to the sort of mid-20s, if you did nothing, it will start to sort of tail off and drop as you get older. So basically, after your sort of mid-20s, your bone density and bone mass will start to drop. How we go about slowing that drop is heavy strength training, or that is the best form of exercise for it. Now, with regards to what that looks like, basically, it's the weight you can lift for 6 reps. So it's roughly an 80% of your 1 rep max. So if you could lift one time 100 kilos, your 6 rep max would be 85 kilos, there or thereabouts. So now, you don't have to do a 1 rep max to be able to get there. You can sort of do it the other way. You can do it the way that I'm going to kind of describe in the next part. So it's heavy strength training. So again, if we just sort of go back to what I was talking about before, if you're at sort of 25, 35, 45, that sort of age, you want to maintain bone health into your 50s, 60s, 70s. Now, even if you're in your 50s, 60s and 70s and you want to maintain your bone health and potentially grow it a little bit stronger, then you're going to need to do strength training. For the very simple reason that your bones respond to that stress, to that load, and it will lay down more minerals and therefore more bone. And I'll talk about bone more specifically in another podcast, how it's built, what it's made out of, so on and so forth. So with regards to if you've got a good sort of bone density now, then you'll probably need to do heavy strength training. 85% of 1 rep max, 6 reps, 3 to 5 sets of heavy exercises. Now, if you have sort of osteoporotic bones, or your bones are weaker, or you haven't done any exercise in a long time, then your 6 rep max Obviously, it will be heavy because it's all relative, but it won't be sort of big, heavy weights that I'm going to describe in another part. Again, it's all relative. And then as your bones and muscles get stronger, this will then sort of build the weight up. So it may be a light weight, but that light weight may be your 6 rep max, if that makes sense. So essentially, what we are looking for is heavy strength training. If you see, for example, now this is nothing against Pilates, but if you see good for building bone health or maintaining bone health in Pilates, and you're of a good health and fitness, then it's not going to do that for your bones. It may do it for sort of weakened bones, but it won't do it for healthy bones because the load just isn't there. It can challenge the muscles and those types of things, but the load just isn't there to build a big femur, which is the main bone in your leg, or your shin bones, or your humerus bone, or your forearm bones. It's just not going to do it. So you need to be lifting heavy, and that means possibly screwing up your face and really sort of shifting some heavy weight. So that's kind of what it needs to look like. Now, as I mentioned, it's a 6 rep max. So how do we get to our 6 rep max? Well, there's a few ways of getting into it. Now, if we just take exercise and we don't do any sort of assessment or anything like that, so we're not going to do a 1 rep max test or a 6 rep max test or anything like that. We're just going to sort of use exercise. There are a few precursors that we need. We need good core strength and stability. So we may not even start with heavy strength training. We may just start with building up the core strength. So as an example, if someone comes to me and they have a specific goal of sort of building bone health or maintaining bone health, maintaining of a muscle mass that they've got, then I would need to look at, okay, well, first of all, we need to build some bits and pieces because we need the core strength. Because it's heavy training, what we don't want is a weak torso but strong legs. So we want the torso to be as strong as the legs. So when we come to lift, the legs may be able to lift it, but we get a sagging torso or a bending torso as we lift. We don't want that. We need that rigidity through the torso. So we need to build up that core strength and the endurance in it as well. What we may also need to build, because we're going to be talking about some specific exercises that are sort of better than others for the reasons that I'm going to describe, we may need to build some range of movement, or we may need to adapt the exercises accordingly. But essentially, we need to build a necessary range of movement required to lift the weight. So if we're lifting something off the floor, we need the necessary range of movement to be able to get down there so we don't compromise the body. Because we're lifting heavy weights, that puts us at a higher risk of injury, which we'll sort of talk a little bit more about later on. And then what we would need to do with regards to reps and sets, so we start with the core strength, we build that up, we start building and sort of improving range of movement. When it comes to the actual lifting, what we would do is you would start at a higher rep. So you may start 12 reps and just do the exercises at that rep range. Then you can go a little bit heavier and take it to 8 reps. So let's just say your 12 rep max is 50 kilos. So let's just assume your 1 rep max is 100. 50% of that is 50 kilos. So we start you there. Then we take you down to 8 reps. So we move up to 65 kilos. And then eventually we take you into the 6 rep max, which is going to be about 80, 85 kilos, which is where we want to be. So we're building through that in stages. So we're not just throwing you in the deep end and building sort of out and out strength, because again, the body's going to respond to that and it may not respond to that in the most favourable way. It may be a little bit harder to do that. So we've got the precursors of the building of the core strength and stability and the endurance through there. Again, if there's any sort of back pain in the system or if any muscle tightness around the back, then we're going to need to sort that out as well. But we're also going to need joint range of movement, so we may need to build that up as well. And then finally, the final step is as we get into the 12 rep training, it's then as we go down 10, 8 and 6, we build the weight up accordingly to match that sort of 85 rep max. And by going that way, if we don't know what your 1 rep max is, if we build that way, 12, 10, 8, 6, basically when you get to rep 6, you may be able to do 1 more, and that's about it. And that is a maybe. If it's a true 6 rep max, obviously you won't be able to do any more. But if you have 1 left in the tank, you know you're in the right area. Because on that last one, it may just be complete failure and it all falls to pieces. So if you know you've got 1 in the bank, you know you can do 6 with the proper positions of the body, the proper range of movement, so on and so forth. So with regards to strength training, we kind of know now what it is. 85% of our 1 rep max. So if our 1 rep max is 100 kilos, it's 85 kilos. We know we've got some precursors, and which are core strength, stability and endurance. Then we may have to build some range of movement. We may have to sort out any back pain or muscle tightness that's there as well. And then we also know how to build into it. We start at 12 reps, go to 10, 8 and 6. And each time we do that over a period of weeks, we take the weight up. And then when we get to that 6 rep, if we know we've got 1 left in the bank, or we may have 1 left in the bank, we know we've got the right weight because we know we can complete 6 with the proper positions. What we'll do next is talk about sort of better and worse exercises. You can kind of use any exercise as better or worse exercises because it isn't about the exercise, it's more about the load. So the 85% of 1 rep max. So if you're lifting off the floor, then it's 85% of your 1 rep max. If you're doing a bicep curl, it's 85% of your 1 rep max because it needs that sort of load. The body needs to be loaded in that way, or the bones and the muscles need to be loaded in that way, which will then get that physiological response of of stimulating bone growth or maintaining bone density and maintaining muscle mass. So it is more about the load, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about 3 main exercises, and then we can talk about some other ones as well. Now, the reason I've chose these is because there is a functional aspect to it, or a better word than functional is probably movement aspect to it. So the first exercise is the back squat. Now, obviously we are squatting each and every day. There are some people that do find it difficult to squat down into a chair or out of a chair or whatever it may be. So the squat is a very good exercise for that. Another advantage for it, if we're doing a barbell back squat, which is where the barbell goes across the back and we hold it back like this, the weight is essentially out of our hands. So it's across the back. So what that allows us to do is build strength without the grip in the way. Where the deadlift, which is another exercise that I'm going to talk about, is a very good exercise, grip strength can be a limiting factor. So our grip may fail before the lift does, or the legs do, or whatever. So the grip can be the limiting factor. So again, that would be a prerequisite as well, is making sure we've got the requisite grip strength. So the back squat allows us to take the grip out of the equation. But again, another limiting factor could be range of movement at the shoulders, being able to get the arms right back into this position where the bar's sitting. So that could be a limiting factor. So again, there is no sort of best and worst exercise. I'm just choosing these because there is a everyday advantage to be got from doing these exercises. And the back squat is where we put the barbell across the back, and basically we sort of squat back with the hips, we bend the knees, we keep the torso up as much as we can, and we have the barbell across the back, which is loaded up with when we get there, our 6 rep max. So that will be exercise number 1. Exercise number 2 is what's called an overhead press. Now, again, an overhead press is basically we have a barbell or a weight. Now, it doesn't have to be an Olympic bar, because an Olympic bar is 20 kilos on its own. So that may be too heavy for most people or some people. So we would have some sort of bar, or we would at least be pressing some weights up over the head. Now, why do we press over the head? Well, we get load going down through the arms. That's sort of the first part of it. So that's the advantage. We get that coming down through the arm. You can get across the top of the back into the scapula and sort of down in through the back as well. If we do a barbell press, which is where we lie down and push the bar off us, we don't get as much of that because we haven't got the load going all the way down the back. We've just got it going across sort of the top of the back and the shoulders. What also comes with it from the movement perspective is lifting something up onto a high shelf, as an example. So going from there and up over the head. So that's what an overhead press gives us, is a better ability to do that. We can then talk about the stance. So you can stand with a neutral stance, which is where the feet just stand alongside each other, or you can do a split squat, or a split stance, which is where one foot goes in front of the other. That can be a little bit more advantageous because you can put some weight going through that back leg and you can sort of angle the body a little bit more. The only thing you do have to watch is overarching or overextending the lower back, which is where a barbell press can be more advantageous if that happens. The third exercise is the deadlift. So this is lifting off the floor. So where I talked about before, the limiting factor can be the grip. Again, that's something that needs to be taken into consideration. So when you are lifting and doing a 6 rep exercise, what fails first? Is it the grip that's failing, or is that the limiting factor, or is it the legs and the ability to lift the weight off the floor? So coming to that understanding will help you understand whether you've got the right weight or not, or the right load that's going to get that response or not. So again, that needs to be understood to be able to build into that as well. So it's very much coming to that understanding of which is going to be the best exercise for you. Obviously, those 3 that I've just mentioned. And I should describe, a deadlift is where you lift a dead weight from the floor. So what you need to be able to do to be able to perform this exercise correctly, which is why it's different to the back squat, there is more hinging of the hip, and then you tip the body over further. That requires a certain range of movement. So again, that could be a limiting factor. If you want to do a sort of a squat style deadlift, so you basically go into a squat exercise, so your hips come down. So with regards to a squat and a deadlift, the difference is, obviously, with the squat, you've got the barbell on the back, but the difference in the movement is the hips come down and you bend the knees more. So the hips come down much more level with the knees. And that will depend on how good the range of movement is, how sort of far down you get them. When you do like a deadlift type movement, which is more of a hip hinge, the hips stay much higher and the body tips over much further. That's more of what you would describe as like a deadlift. But if you want to do a squat style deadlift, which is basically where you go down into a squat, you keep the body upright more, you bend the knees more and you bring the hips down more, but you lift a dead weight from the floor. It's kind of the same thing. You're just doing a dead lift, you're lifting a dead weight from the floor with a back squat sort of technique. And so you can sort of, in some respects, you can kind of combine the two in that respect. What you then get are other exercises. Now, again, as I mentioned at the start, you can kind of do any exercise. So you could do a barbell press or a dumbbell press. You could even go onto a machine and do a chest press or a row or a cable pull down, whatever it needs to be. You could do bicep curls, you could do tricep extensions, you could do leg extensions and leg curls on machines and things like that, because the main thing is the load, which is what we want. Ideally, we would stick to the biggest movements because then we can get the heaviest load and that will get the best response. So if we can use these big exercises like the back squat, like the overhead press, like the deadlift, that's where we can lift the most weight. That's where we get the best response. So all you've got to think about with strength training is the heaviest load possible. And that you generally do that with bigger movements, multi-joint exercises. Squats, you move the ankle, the knee, the hip. Deadlifts, much the same, you just don't bend the knee as much. Overhead press, shoulders, elbows. Barbell press, i.e. like a chest press, lead down on your back, shoulders and elbows. The advantage of the overhead press and the barbell press over a row is the weight is kind of on top of you, so you get that sort of gravity as well. With any sort of row, you've got to pull it towards you, so the load doesn't go through the arm as much as it will with the overhead press. So, but we're starting to get into slightly unnecessary detail for now. But as a general rule, big exercises, heavy loads will be the best exercises. Wrong exercises are those small or not as effective exercises will be the smaller movements because the heavy loads aren't the same. And also Pilates, core exercises, because they won't get the response. They need to be there as well. Core muscles need to be there as well, but you just won't get the same response. Yoga's another one. You won't get the same response. You won't get the load going through. Your body weight isn't always enough. You need extra. So yes, good exercises, big exercises, heavy loads. When it comes to strength training, injury risk comes with it. As the load goes up, so does the potential for injury risk, or so does the injury risk and your potential for injury. So we have to go into it with that understanding, which is why I mentioned at the start you need to build into it. So if you are new to exercise, then you definitely need to build into it. You need to start from where you are. So think about the exercises that you've done. If you want to start lifting weights, go and start lifting weights, but lift lighter weights more times. As you get more confident with the weights, you can then start building up the weight, bringing down the reps, which will help mitigate the risk of injury when you get to the really heavy training. If you've done weight training but you haven't done heavy strength training, then again you need to build towards that. You need to build confidence, you need to build reps, you need to get more confident with load. You need to understand proper technique, you need to understand range of movement, you need to understand how to adapt exercises to be able to use your range of movement. So an example of that, if we use the deadlift as an example, let's just say I can't move my hips down very far. So as my body comes over, my spine rounds. So it goes into that position. An easy way to mitigate that is just lift the weight from the floor. So put it on a couple of risers. So the weight is lifted up off the floor so you don't have to go down as far. That's one way to adapt an exercise. So if you don't have the range of movement to get all the way down and pick it up off the floor, you lift the weight up so you go down as far as you can maintain the proper position, the proper joint position, proper technique for the exercise. So you need to sort of have an understanding of that as well, because strength training isn't something that you just jump into, because there are risks that come with it. Obviously, we're going to talk about the benefits in a second, but there are risks that come with it as well. So you need to build that condition. You need to build into the training by starting at lighter weights and higher reps, and then building down through the reps and up through the weight. And what will happen, so say you go from 12 reps to 10 reps. Well, what weight should you be using? Well, as a general rule, you will probably know. You will probably know that if it's a deadlift, if you go from 12 reps at 50 kilos, you know that 10 reps is going to be about 55, 57 and a half, somewhere in that bracket. 60, maybe a bit of a push. 60 may be your 8 rep weight. But as you sort of get used to that 55, you may even get up to 60 at 10 reps. And then when you're ready for 8 reps, you would then go to 65, Again, get to 65 for the 8 reps, build that up to 70 kilos, and then go to 6 reps. So again, you're just sort of building, you'll kind of know what's too heavy. I'm very, when I'm training people, I will always ask them as well. They're a part of the journey as well. So when we're talking about what weight should you go up to, obviously I use my sort of professional expertise and knowledge in that. I will always act on the sort of err on the side of caution, but I always ask them, how did that feel? How many more do you think you could have done? How did your back feel? How did your knee feel? Whatever I need to ask. And then they will kind of know, I can do it, but it's probably the right weight for now. I don't want any more. And then me as a trainer, it's like, right, that's fine, because the weight will go up. The more that they do it, the weight will go up. I don't need to move them any faster because they will get there. It is just a matter of time. So we have to understand how we build that capacity and how we build that condition into heavy training. Then we get recovery. We need to be able to recover, because as weights get heavier, your body needs to build itself back. As you exercise, you break down. A lot of people make the mistake and think exercise makes you stronger. Exercise actually makes you weaker. And that's evident if you think about how much you could lift at the start of the program to how much you could lift at the end of the program. So if you do deadlifts to start with, at the very first exercise, let's just say you can lift 60 kilos for 12 times. Let's say you then just did a test and go, okay, let's do it last as well, 60 kilos as well. And you might be thinking, hang on a minute, I can't do that. That's far too heavy now. I am tired. I am a lot weaker than I was at the start. So exercise makes you weaker. Recovery makes you stronger. So we need to come to that understanding. So when we are doing this training, we need to understand our recovery. We need to sleep well. We need to eat the proper foods. We need to have enough rest, being off our feet and things like that, not using our muscles essentially to allow them to recover. So we need to build that in as well. And there are lots of different ways of doing that. Again, I'm just trying to give you an overview all the way through the sort of strength training journey and the breadth of the strength training journey, rather than a detailed look at recovery and all these different aspects of it. Because, I mean, we could be here all day doing something like, or talking about something like that. So we've got an increased risk of injury. So we need to build condition and we need to recover properly. So we need to do that by managing the weights we do, modifying exercises and things like that. But you can only really do that as you understand what you need to do. So you need to start doing it and then get feedback from your sessions and feedback from your body to think, right, I need to change that. I need to increase that weight. I need to decrease that weight. I need to change those reps. I need to change that weight. I need to adapt the exercise in that way or this way or whatever it might be. So with the risks out of the way, what we've now got are some of the benefits. Now, as I've talked about, you've got bone density. And bone density, much the same as muscles, they're adaptable. They grow and they diminish. If you don't use them, you lose them. What people generally think is as they get older, their body weakens, or they shouldn't be doing something, or they can't do something. And that's partly true because that mechanism is there. But that mechanism is there if you don't do anything. If you exercise, you will maintain bone mass much longer than if you stopped doing something. So don't think, well, I'm a bit older, I'm an older adult, I shouldn't be doing it. You certainly can do it, and in some respects you should be doing it for the health of your bones and also the health of your muscle as well. And particularly what are called type 2 fibers, which are fast twitch muscle fibers. Now these fibers are much more explosive. So you've got slow twitch muscle fibers, which are like, let's just call them your endurance fibers. There are subsets of that, but for now, let's just focus on type 1 and type 2 fibers. Type 1 fibers, slow twitch muscle fibers, they're like your endurance ones. They're the ones that keep going. Type 2 fibers, they are your explosive fibers. they are activated much more during strength training. So by maintaining those, you will maintain not only sort of your muscle mass better, but also you will maintain more function for longer. So more movement for longer, or more movement capacity for longer. Then you get various fringe benefits. So just as I mentioned, just better improved functional strength, being able to lift things higher up, being able to lift heavier things from the floor. In some respects, and if strength training is done properly, you will have a reduced risk of injury and falls and things like that, because you'll be able to catch your body, your muscles will be stronger. All these different types of things. Mood will build because you kind of have to get up for it. So as you build into it, you kind of have to be in a mindset to be able to get that far. Plus, once you've finished, just the energy is up a lot more, so you're able to then sort of maintain that mood a little bit longer. Also, heart and brain health as well. So not only are you stressing skeletal muscles, you're also stressing cardiac muscle, but also the your blood, as you're doing the exercise, blood pressure will rise because you're putting more strain on that system and trying to push more blood to where you want it. So they are just some of the fringe benefits that you'll get from strength training, along with the maintenance of bone density for longer and the maintenance of muscle mass, in particularly the type 2 fibers. Many thanks for watching. If you found this podcast useful, please do give it a like. If you've got a comment or a question, stick it down below about anything that I've said, about the benefits, about how to get into it, about how to build into strength training, whatever it may be, anything I've talked about, stick it in the comments below. And if you want to watch more like this, hit the subscribe button and the bell icon.